Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and many thanks to Joe and Michael and Professor Roubini for joining me today. In our time together this morning, there are 4 topics we'd like to touch on. First, cryptocurrencies as a store of value and a method of payment. Secondly, challenges, if any, associated with adoption to cryptocurrencies. Third, the impact that digital currencies have on monetary policy. And finally, the applicability of distributed ledger technologies away from the digital currencies themselves. So I'd like to please start with Mike. Discussion about what we call industrial use cases of digital currencies have taken up many inches and breadths in the last 3 years. Some people have posited that the greatest use cases are in emerging markets where fiat currencies either don't exist, think Syria, or where they are saddled with hyperinflation, Venezuela. Others believe that digital currencies can and should displace even functioning fiat currencies because they have already won the game to be a store of value and a method of payment. So, with crypto spring now blooming again, how should the market broadly versus niche players think about the potential adoption of cryptocurrency in the next 12 to 24 months?
That was a big question. Well, thank you. Nouriel's usually so loud about this, it took 2 to take the other side. Listen, just a quick little recap of history, right? We had this spectacular bubble, 2016 and 17, where everyone bought into this idea, retail bought into this idea that there was this new technology that was going to change the world. Bubbles always happen around things that often change the world. They just happen early because people get so excited. They have the imagination to get excited. And so we had, the kind of frenzy of crypto and then the collapse. And it's easy to think in the collapse that, it was all a mistake. The reality is there's a tremendous amount of stuff going on. And in some ways, there's been a small miracle. Bitcoin today has got about a $100 billion market cap. It is a store of value. The debate is already over. The Bitcoin won. And it is now seen by people all around the world as a legitimate place to preserve their value. Not as a currency necessarily, but say as a proxy to gold. What's interesting is you've got entrepreneurs, people like Abby Johnson who are building, a division of Fidelity to take advantage of this shift. I was just out in California. I visited 4 venture funds, and each of them had one of the smartest 19 to 24-year-olds in the country working at them. These guys have committed their life into this space. And so the amount of talent it's pulling in tells me that, maybe Nouriel's not right. Maybe these smart people are seeing something else. Bitcoin as a store of value is a pretty simple story. Gold, right, it's got an $8 trillion market cap. Gold originally became a store of value because the Incas and the Aztecs thought it came from God. There's something magic. It's not necessarily the technology of Bitcoin, right? It's open sourced, I could take the same technology and launch it tomorrow and call it Novocoin or Nouriel coin, and it wouldn't be worth a whole lot. What makes it worth something is a social construct, right? People have decided it's worth something. Why, and who knows, there's some magic there, just like there was God, the Incas choosing gold as their store of value. What I'm certain about is that the framework for institutions to move in, to actually participate in what was originally a retail-led rally is being built with a real serious intent. There are custody shops, places like New York Dig and Fidelity, Anchor out in California that are world-class, that are allowing institutions to move in. Endowments like Yale and Harvard and Stanford have made large investments in Bitcoin and the ecosystem around it. And so, I used to say the herd is coming. The herd is actually now slowly on the move. Facebook has announced a major play, or at least there have been reports of Facebook announcing a major play into the cryptocurrency space. And when you think about that for a moment, one of the largest consumer companies in the world has said, I'm going to participate. And so you're going to see a step function in how fast the institutions say, I got to get in there. And again, so that's Bitcoin, and I think it's got a very healthy future. It's back to 6,000 or 5,900. My sense is it's going to continue to march higher. The rest of the cryptocurrencies, listen, the bubble crashed to some degree because everybody was getting vested with store of value. Everything can't be a store of value, otherwise you have an unlimited supply and prices collapse, which is a little bit what we saw. And so the rest of the cryptocurrencies, just like the other elements on the periodic table, have to have a use case, right? Gold is the only element out of the 114 or 118 that's valuable just because it's valuable. Copper is valuable because we use it. And so if it's Ethereum, which I'm sure Joe can talk about, or any of the other projects, Hashgraph or Definity, that are vying to be Web 3.0, are vying to have some place as a privacy coin, their value is going to come twofold. One, do they get adoption? Do they get usage? They created the room. Will they get people in the room? That will bring some value. And then the second is, can they create the same magic where they're seen as a store of value, where they're seen as a currency? And so I think what you've seen this year is Bitcoin outperforming most of the other coins. I think that probably continues a little while longer because it's going to take a couple years for these other projects to really accelerate their growth and usage. But this is not an industry that's going away.
Thank you, Mike. Professor Roubini, Mike used the words Bitcoin won and points to Fidelity's transformation in favor of cryptocurrencies. In your comments in October to the United States Senate Committee on Banking, you referred to cryptocurrencies as, quote, the mother of all scams and bubbles. Big words. Can you please contextualize your view in the history of major bubbles? What are the early warning signs? How does the price and buying action around Bitcoin or Ethereum, for example, point to or have lineage to the tulip bubble or the dot-com crisis? Is there a lineage that we can trace from that to crypto?
Well, in my US Senate Banking Committee testimony, I titled it, Crypto is the mother and father of all bubbles now gone bust. And the reason is that if you're comparing this bubble to other historical bubbles like Tulipenia, Mississippi bubble, dot-com bubble, and so on, and you look 3 years before the bursting of the bubble, the dot-com bubble, the rising price was 3x. In the South Sea bubble, the rising price was 8x. Tulipmania and Mississippi bubble, the rising price was 35x. In the case of Bitcoin, the rise was 60x. And then has gone up, collapsed, completely like the other bubble. And it's not true that all bubbles are a new technology. Tulipenia disappeared. Mississippi bubble disappeared. South Sea bubble disappeared. There are some technological bubbles, and the others are just pure bubbles. Even with the rising price this year, Bitcoin is down 70% from the peak. The other top 10 down 80%. Thousands of shitcoins have gone down 95 to 99%. It's a technical term. There are 500,000 items on Google if you search shitcoin. They're shitcoins, truly. Why shitcoins? Studies suggest that 81% of all the cryptocurrencies were, to begin with, a scam. 11% more are dead or failing. So 92% dead, failing, or a scam. Only 8% of them trading on exchanges and have lost, on average, more than 90% of their value. So this was the mother and father of all bubble gone bust. The term, by the way, cryptocurrency is a total misnomer. To be a currency, you have to be a unit of account. None of them is a unit of account. Nobody's pricing anything in Bitcoin or any other. Has to be a viable and scalable means of payments. With Bitcoin, how many transactions per second you can do? 7, okay? With Visa, you can do 25,000 per second, okay? And it's not a stable store of value because the price can go up and down 20%. If you're a merchant and accept Bitcoin for payment, in an hour, you can have your profit margin disappearing because of the price change. Therefore, nobody's using it for any types of payment. So calling them cryptocurrency is a total misnomer. And they're subject to massive manipulation. Recent studies suggest that 95% of all transactions in Bitcoin in various exchanges are false. Spoofing, wash trading, pump and dump trading, front running. It's just never seen such a level of manipulation. So the reality is these are not currencies. They are not, there is a principle in Bitcoin by the co-founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, who's a genius, who says you cannot have at the same time something that is scalable, decentralized, and secure. Traditional financial systems are scalable and they're secure, but they're centralized. Who cares? You have trusted institution. In the case of crypto, is not scalable, 7 transactions per second, is not decentralized. You have massive centralization of miners, of wealth, of coders, of exchanges, and there is no security. You lose your private key, you can have billions of dollars gone forever. The only solution is like Stone Age technology, put it in cold storage in a cave. That's, you are safe. If you lose your little paper where you wrote your private key, your wealth is gone for good. So this has no future as a currency. It's never going to have one. No one is adopting it. In stable economies around the world, advanced economies, emerging markets, where inflation is low, nobody cares about this stuff. It's not a currency.
Thank you, Professor. Colorful as build. Joe, go ahead.
Joe,
okay, we'll let Joe go first. Okay. So I want to press on whether there are potentially caveats to the professor's view. So I'm going to call them scam coins because I won't use a swear word here. How do we evolve such that these scam coins don't exist and don't taint the rest? How does regulation respond to potentially this 95% quote that the professor gave around wash trades? And how does the infrastructure then evolve to what Mike had mentioned was a step function change in the adoption of cryptocurrency? Is the infrastructure today really ready, and what changes need to be made to take a 20-fold increase in volume and adoption?
Forgive me if I go a little bit off script.
Go for it.
But addressing our friend Nouriel's points directly would be like having a debate with him 4 years ago, because that's where the data is coming from. There have been significant advances in our ecosystem since then. Cryptocurrency is one very useful function of this brand new technology called blockchain. Blockchain is a next-generation database technology. Cryptocurrencies are very interesting, but they're not really the breakthrough. The breakthrough is this new trust infrastructure. So we have the ability to build systems on a new trust foundation. For thousands of years, we've been building our infrastructure on centralized subjective trust systems, and now we have this new technology, and it's going to take quite a while to build these systems, but we have this new technology where we can automate trust and we can guarantee execution of agreements, and cryptocurrency was one of the first proofs of concept, and it has a lot of really interesting use cases around the world. Like any new technology, the makers will try to make use of that technology. The breakers will try to extract value in inappropriate ways from the technology. And the technology represents such strong asymmetries of information that the breakers were able to get in there and perpetrate schemes. And so lots of cleaning up has been done and needs to be done, and some of it will be self-regulatory. We're building platforms that enable these systems to be analyzed much better. The SEC is scrutinizing things very significantly. So these systems are going to be valuable as different kinds of money, and we have many different price-stable tokens to get rid of the volatility of these systems. Being able to clear and settle a transaction, whether it's payment versus payment or delivery versus payment, in the instant of the transaction is a massive breakthrough. And so there are many different exchanges around the world, new ones and existing ones, that are making use of that technology. It will require a build-out of the infrastructure. We've been building privacy and confidentiality into these systems. We've been building scalability into these systems since Nouriel last read about them. What we have in Ethereum is a base trust layer. So it can handle somewhere between 15 and 27 transactions per second, depending on the complexity of the transaction. But in the Ethereum ecosystem, we have 10 different technologies at layer 2 that bring scalability. So we have games, we have exchanges and other applications that are bringing their own infrastructure. We already have tens of thousands of available decentralized transactions per second on Ethereum right now, and by the end of this year, I believe we'll have hundreds of thousands of decentralized transactions per second. So will these systems get used? Will it affect price? I would say in the same way that the internet in the early days caught the imagination of many and caused people to flood into that ecosystem, inflating prices, and we saw corrections. We're going to see that. We've seen that. We're going to see it again, probably several times. But this new technology will affect everything. These token systems are somewhat limited in their issuance, but the utilization, the demand for these tokens, and Ether is not a cryptocurrency, it's a crypto fuel. It pays for computation and storage on the platform. As we get hundreds of thousands and millions of transactions in layer 2, all anchoring into layer 1 for the fuller trust characteristic, we're going to see orders of magnitude increase in demand.
Thank you, Joe. If you don't mind, I want to press on something. So you used the words crypto fuel to describe Ethereum. So inherent in that is a point that Mike had made, which is that Ethereum in and of itself is not what individuals in the market are choosing to trade. It's actually powering an industrial use case underneath it. So can you say a few words about what you think is the most promising industrial use case that will then lead to Ethereum being the fuel that powers that?
Sure. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. There are other kinds of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies have important use cases in some parts of the world, but in this country, there's nothing that I need Bitcoin for that I can't do with my credit card. But Ethereum is a platform for decentralized applications. It's a platform to imbue transactions with people you don't know, with people you don't trust, with trust, with certainty. And so we're building out so many different things in so many niches. We have a platform called Ujo Music, which has 1,000 artists that have uploaded their content. They attach usage policies to their content. They enable other artists or fans to access their content in real time, get licenses in real time, without losing 70% of the value to the intermediary that stands in between the content creator and the user. Different kinds of resources and service providers can also see disintermediation in their industry. We have a platform called Civil. It's a platform for sustainable and ethical journalism. So we have now 40 newsrooms from around the world that are covering local news or topical news that are not subject to the broken business dynamics of the journalism industry right now, the broken truth dynamics in the industry right now. And so it's a platform that is tokenized, that brings the content creators in direct contact with their readers or viewers. It has a foundation, it has a constitution, and there's a minimum viable set of rules, and the tokens enable many different actions on that platform, including governance of the platform.
Thank you, Joe.
On the more commercial side, there's one of our biggest projects is a commodity trade finance project, so it's not public blockchain. So it's called Comgo. It's some of the biggest banks and energy companies in the world, and brings them together in an open, trustful collaboration infrastructure. It's the kind of construct that would have been incredibly difficult to do without this technology, and incredibly difficult to build without the technology. We built it in collaboration with 15 other companies, tech divisions. We built the whole thing in 6 months. We went live in 6 months. There are transactions on it right now. The reason we're able to do that is because all this trust infrastructure, all this transaction infrastructure, you get for free, and you can just concentrate on building the user interface and the business logic on a system like that.
That's very clear. Thanks, Joe. Mike, you had wanted to jump in right after the professor's comments. I want to give you the opportunity to do so again.
I'm sure I would ever remember them all. No, listen, I don't want to completely disagree with Nouriel. You know, he's getting some points right. We had a bubble. A lot of the coins were scam coins and shit coins. A lot had good intention and had no capacity to do anything. And, you know, prices collapsed. If you look at the internet, right, we went from 6 trillion to 1 trillion in the NASDAQ in 1999 or 2000 in the crash. That's about 85%, roughly the same as what crypto went down. And a lot of those companies never came back. I don't think in the short run, cryptocurrency is the right term. We're not going to use crypto to pay for our shoes if there's lots of volatility. Currencies need to be stable. I do think we're going to see stable coins, stable-ish coins coming. And I know, Telegram is working on a project. They have 200 million users. Facebook's got 2 billion users. And I want to spend just 2 seconds talking about the difference between a centralized digital currency, like what we have going on in China right now, and a decentralized one. So China right now, about 95% of all financial transactions happens on their phone. That number is about 4% in the US. We're way behind. So that alone would be no big deal. But every one of those transactions gets sent to a central processing government clearinghouse. So now the government knows what every single financial transaction in that country is doing. They've also got cameras all over the place, facial recognition cameras. They're also scraping your search engines. All of that still would be no big deal 10 years ago, right? You'd have a bunch of people in a room searching through receipts to see if Nouriel bought cigarettes. But now with the advent of machine-based learning and AI, they can process that data at lightning speed and know factually or with great certainty who might be a dissident, who might be gay, who might be getting ready to do something that the government doesn't want. That's a scary thought, and it's happening today. Last year, 30 million Chinese residents had their mobility challenged or had their mobility restricted because of their social responsibility score. And so as we move into this digital world, having a centralized authority, a centralized depository of your data and information is scary as hell. Imagine what just happened in Brunei when the Sultan of Brunei said, hey, I'm going to stone all gay men, and if you're a gay woman, you only get 10 years in prison, and if you're an adulterer, God forbid, we're going to stone you in the town square. Yeah, he said that, and he said that about 5 weeks ago. And his sense walked it back a little bit. I hope some of you guys that have their money spoke up. Imagine now they get the China technology. Hey, now you know exactly. So we have catapulted into 1984. And in a lot of ways, a decentralized payment currency, a stable coin that runs on a blockchain that isn't owned by the government, that's owned by multiple or run by multiple actors, is a far, far safer and democratic future. And so in a lot of ways, getting this right is essential to our kind of future privacy, or we're going to live in those books we read 25 years ago.
Thank you, Mike. That's a scary world to think about living in. But I do want to pick up on the comment that you made that decentralized cryptocurrencies are safer than centralized one, and ask a question over to the professor. So in the discussion about non-financial institutions launching stable coins, particularly because of the ease of payments, there's been a discussion on what might be the impact on monetary policy. And so the question is, does government need to have a monopoly on monetary policy for it to be a tool that can be efficiently used? And what does the potential breaking of that monopoly in the way that Mike has just described mean for policymakers when the next crisis comes along? Do they have the same tools? Are they as effective?
Well, I'd answer the question by saying, first of all, there's a bit of a paradox when people talk about stable coins, because on one side, the crypto folks say central banks are debasing fiat currencies, and every other day there is a new stable coin that is actually linked to the US dollar. And by the way, the US dollar is very stable, it's not debased. Inflation is barely 2%. And by the way, all these stable coins are not, it's a misnomer. They're an unstable coin because they're not fully backed. They're only partially backed, collateralized, and even some of the big ones have collapsed, and some of them has been a total scam, like Tether is now found out that it's not backed. Wait, let me finish, okay? You spoke, let me finish, okay? So then it's a total misnomer, and having them, they're going to collapse one after the other. Nobody's really using them, and those that are used, like Tether, are used to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. There is a study that says that the price of Bitcoin has been propped up by Tether by 80%, up to 80%. Okay, in terms of monetary policy, today we're already in a system where there's a fractional reserve banking system, and private banks create money when they create bank deposits. That's a fractional reserve system is. Suppose that you have tomorrow a central bank that decides to create, as has been discussed, a central bank digital currency. First of all, don't get excited, you crypto guys, because it's not going to have anything to do with crypto and blockchain. It will be a centralized ledger. Today, every private bank has access to the balance sheet of the Fed. Me, you, or any private corporation don't have access. Suppose we all had access to the balance sheet of the Fed, then you don't have the private banking payment system with deposits, because you'll have something secure, can be even anonymous, it's totally efficient, safe, secure, and doesn't have any cost. So paradoxically, what's going to happen is that if and when central bank digital currencies are going to be introduced, first of all, they're not going to be based on crypto, nothing about this decentralized stuff. It's going to be centralized ledger. Secondly, they're going to, by definition, be superior to what? Both bank deposits, digital payment system like the Venmos of the world under some condition, and they're going to be, of course, totally dominating any cryptocurrencies that we know doesn't have any function of the money. And in terms of effectiveness of monetary policy, paradoxically, is going to make monetary policy more effective. And we know there is a zero bound for interest rates, and we hit it. What we went to, in the US, we went to quantitative easing. In other countries, we went to negative policy rates, like in Europe, BOJ, ECB. But there was a limit to how much you can go negative with policy rates because people can switch from excess reserves to cash. The advantage of having cash disappearing, like in China, Sweden, everywhere else, is that if you hit the zero bound, you can go more negative with the policy rates if you have a central bank digital currency without having this essentially crowding out of from excess reserve to cash. So it will make actually monetary policy more effective in a situation of economic recession, depression, and when you have actually deflation. Not make it less strong. It's going to make it more strong.
Thank you,
if and when it
Professor.
happens.
With 8 minutes left, I'll take the final stop on this train and move us away from digital currency for a second. At GS, when we talk about cryptocurrencies, we try to be very mindful to differentiate between the currency, the blockchain, and then distributed ledger technologies, which are largely, when we use those words, private, trustful networks. When we think about the use cases for distributed ledger technologies, often we're not actually reinventing anything new, but rather the centrality in our minds is allowing us to solve old problems. So Joe, the question to you, and then we'll ask Mike to please follow on, is moving away from cryptocurrencies, how have distributed ledger technologies allowed us to modernize old systems or workflows that are inefficient? And how can the technology be applied to digitize regular way equities and debt securities, or to tokenize or wrap other assets? What's the potential of that?
Sure. So just picking up on what Mike was talking about with respect to centralization of critical information about us, one thing that this technology enables is decentralized identity or control of our own personal information. So we're a founding member of something called the Decentralized Identity Foundation. Microsoft, Accenture, et cetera, are significant components of that. I think IBM joined recently. Decentralized identity enables us to control information like our financial or health information rather than having other institutions essentially custody that information for us. So it gives, in the case of health information, let's say, it gives us the ability to use that information, collect it more broadly, use it to maintain or optimize our health, rather than having the health industry use it for their own different purposes. And that would be useful, but not really useful, if it was just sitting on my laptop under my control. But if it's encrypted and if it is attested to cryptographically by a medical professional or a medical institution, and if it's time-stamped on a blockchain, the encrypted version of that, then I can share that information de-identified with a research study, perhaps, or I can share that information with another medical professional or with an insurance company, and they can trust that information rather than it being undermined.
But our health information is some of the most private information that we have about ourselves, and you alluded to the insurance companies potentially misusing that. As an individual, what assurance do I have under these new technologies that someone else will not misuse my information? And unlike the insurance companies in your example, it won't be someone else that I can identify. It will be an ephemeral someone else.
Sure. So one way of implementing the sharing of that information is for me to keep the information, create a digital digest of that information, and then sign the digital digest of the information and have others sign that information. So I wouldn't want my DNA on the blockchain, no matter how well encrypted it is. Because 20, 30 years from now, somebody's going to be using that to write insurance policies for family members of mine, and that won't be good. So those issues have been thought through, and there are good solutions to those things. More on the financial side, this is all based on public key cryptography, and identity can be represented by a public key. You control it from your private key. The private keys essentially can control ownership, access to rights over anything. So it could be different kinds of securities, could be equities. We live in a world where naked short selling is fairly easy to do, where 140% of Dole Food Company share owners can present their shares for a collection of some value, because these centralized systems are easy to cheat. And so decentralized infrastructure, when built properly, will be impossible to cheat. We're building tokens representing natively digital assets like Ether, or like digital storage or digital bandwidth. We're building tokens that represent real estate, real world assets, and we're building exchanges for those things. So as an example of a crossover from this world of more private finance to public blockchain, we've built a private equity exchange with a company called CapBridge. It's called One Exchange. It will be released within a matter of weeks, we believe, and it will be regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. It'll operate on public Ethereum.
That's excellent. Mike, if I can just pick up on that and ask you to go deeper, how far away are we from a digitally native, to use Joe's words, issuance of a major US company on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange?
So listen, the security tokens, in some ways, are the less radical part of this whole thing. And I think they're going to come sometime in the next 18 months. In a lot of ways, they're taking a normal equity, a normal company, either debt or equity, and just putting a new wrapper on it. And so while there's a lot of efficiencies to it, and at one point, maybe there'll be a crowdsourcing piece to it, but not in the US, not in the near future. But it's happening, and people are building the infrastructure. And so you'll have, at one point, LP interest in hedge funds tokenized, and you'll be able to transfer them easier than you can now. Or real estate. There's a bunch of real estate projects that are underway. Again, we're working on that at Galaxy because we think it's part of the capital markets. It's a lot less transformational and radical than the ideas Joe was originally talking about as we decentralize, build decentralized platforms to build companies on top of. But it's coming. We're working on a big project right now, which is a $500 million type ticket to distribute. In the short run, it's not that exciting because you're basically underwriting projects and you're selling them to mostly the same people that would have been buying them before. And so, again, I find it the least exciting part of the space, but it's probably maybe the most profitable part in the short run for a bank.
That's fair enough. I'll reserve the last 2 minutes for the professor, whose skepticism extends beyond just the cryptocurrencies themselves, but also to the digital and distributed ledgers.
Yeah, I mean, now that crypto is not going anywhere, people say the future is in blockchain, enterprise DLT, enterprise blockchain. But if you look carefully at all these experiments, because they're experiments, there is no really use case study. Wait, let me finish. Let me speak. Okay, so all of them are blockchain in name only. Why do I say that? First of all, they are private. They're not public. 2, they are permissionless. They're not permissionless. 3, they're not based on a trustless system, but you have a bunch of trusted validator. 4, the authentication is not based on an algorithmic, distributed, decentralized system, but it's based on trusted validator. So in all dimensions, they call them blockchain because, of course, if you call something blockchain, it's sexy and you raise money, but they have absolutely nothing to do with blockchain. Let's be specific. In the last month, the CEOs of 3 major financial institutions, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and MasterCard, have said, we spend years and years trying blockchain and applications. We spend billions of dollars. We even have dozens, if not hundreds, of patents. And each of 3 of them said, we don't see a use case that is valid. It's all a proof of concept experiment is going nowhere. There's been a study recently that looked at 43 experiments of using blockchain for the kind of things that Joe speaks about, giving identity to the refugees, banking the unbanked, dealing with poverty, and you name it. Guess what? This study looked at 43 experiments. How many of them have been successful? 0. 0, okay? So billions of dollars. There is a whole ecosystem of people, of businesses, of IBMs of the world that do all this stuff, and there is not a single case study that works today. Because there's not going to be any company, any government, any non-profit that's going to put on a public blockchain what? All its balance sheet, all its P&L, all its relation with customers, all its relation with the clients. Nobody's going to do it. There is no reason. There are good reasons why you want to have these things private. So when they talk about blockchain, enterprise blockchain, it has nothing to do with blockchain. It's just a glorified database. We have distributed database. I use Google Doc. It's a distributed database, and I can share it with my friends and other trusted things. That's not blockchain, okay? Let's not confuse things. There is nothing like enterprise blockchain. There is not a single case study that works today.
Since we're out of time, I want to end with one thought. Nouriel, Bitcoin's at 6,000 right now. If at Christmas time it's above 6,000, you have to wear a shirt that says, I love Bitcoin. And if it's below, I'll wear a shirt that says, Nouriel was right. Deal?
I don't care about the price of Bitcoin. That doesn't matter.
You don't want to take the bet? It's okay.
It's not the unit of exchange. It's not the
debate
store
is
of value.
most certainly not going to be solved here.
Nobody's using it. I don't
well, if
care
no one was using
what's
it,
the price.
it would go down.
I'm sure the audience is so appreciative of the passion that you both bring, but sadly, the organizers are giving me the out of time look. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Watch this space.